The notification sound from my phone made my heart stop completely. I stared at the screen in absolute horror, watching my sugar daddy app light up with a new match notification, and my blood turned to ice in my veins. The profile picture showed a man in an expensive tailored suit, his face partially hidden by shadows but unmistakably familiar in the most terrifying way possible. Those sharp, defined jawlines that could cut glass, that cold, calculating expression I saw every single morning in the elevator during our brief, uncomfortable encounters. No fucking way, I whispered to myself in disbelief, my hands trembling uncontrollably as I clicked on the profile with growing dread. The username read Executive Hunter, but there was absolutely no mistaking the identity behind it. This was Stephen Wells, our company's CEO and the most intimidating man I'd ever encountered, the same man who barely acknowledged my existence during board meetings, who could make grown executives cry with a single glacial glance, who commanded respect and fear in equal measure throughout the entire building. My phone buzzed again almost immediately, making me jump. A message had arrived. Conference room A. Now. SW. I felt like I was going to throw up right there at my desk. How the hell did he know it was me? My profile used a completely fake name, carefully cropped photos that didn't clearly show my face, and I'd been so meticulous about maintaining anonymity. But somehow, this incredibly powerful and resourceful man had figured it out. My legs felt weak and unsteady as I stood up from my desk, desperately trying to act normal while my coworkers continued typing away around me, completely unaware that my entire world was crashing down in spectacular fashion. The walk to conference room A felt like walking to my own execution. Each step echoed ominously in the empty hallway, my heart pounding so loud I was sure everyone in the building could hear it. The fluorescent lights seemed harsher than usual, casting everything in an unforgiving glare that made me feel exposed and vulnerable. When I reached the imposing door, I hesitated for what felt like an eternity. Maybe I could run. Maybe I could quit right now, pack up my things and never look back. Maybe I could disappear entirely and start fresh somewhere else. But then the door opened with a soft click, and there he was. Stephen Wells stood there in his perfectly tailored black suit that probably cost more than my car. His dark eyes fixed on me with an intensity that made every instinct scream at me to disappear. He was tall, easily 6'2", with dark hair styled to perfection and a face that belonged on the covers of business magazines. But right now, that devastatingly handsome face looked absolutely terrifying, like a predator who had cornered his prey. "Sit down, Callan," he said, his voice low and controlled, carrying that authoritative tone that made everyone in the company jump to attention. I stepped inside on unsteady legs, barely managing to support my own weight. The conference room suddenly felt impossibly small with him in it, the air thicker and harder to breathe. I sat down at the long mahogany table, keeping my eyes down, waiting for the inevitable, the firing, the humiliation, maybe even legal action for using company resources inappropriately. "Look at me," he commanded, and it wasn't a request. Reluctantly, I raised my eyes to meet his penetrating gaze. Those dark, piercing eyes that had always intimidated me were now studying me like I was some kind of fascinating puzzle he needed to solve, taking in every detail of my flushed face and nervous posture. 3 years, he said, moving closer with predatory grace. 3 years you've worked here, sitting in meetings, passing in hallways, and not once have you looked at me the way you're looking at me right now. I swallowed hard, my throat dry as sandpaper. "Sir, I can explain. Can you?" He pulled out his phone with deliberate slowness, and I watched in horror as my sugar daddy app profile appeared on his screen. My carefully crafted description, my cropped photos, everything laid bare. Callan Rivers, 24, looking for financial support in exchange for companionship. Discreet and professional. Heat rushed to my face in a wave of mortification. Hearing him read my profile out loud in that cold, professional voice was worse than any nightmare I could have imagined. The words sounded so much more desperate and pathetic when spoken by the most powerful man in the building. "I'm sorry," I whispered, barely able to get the words out. "I needed the money for my mom's medical bills, and I thought—" "You thought what? That you could hide from me?" He leaned against the table, his eyes never leaving mine, studying every micro-expression on my face. I know everything about my employees, Callan, including the fact that you've been struggling financially for months, working overtime without pay, skipping meals and still falling behind on bills. My throat felt impossibly dry. The fact that he knew about my personal struggles made everything so much worse. Are you going to fire me? For the first time, something flickered in his expression. It was almost like amusement, but darker, more predatory. Fire you? He pulled out his phone again, fingers moving across the screen with purpose. I have a much better idea. My phone buzzed in my pocket. Another message from Executive Hunter. Delete everyone except me. You have 5 minutes. I stared at the message in complete shock, then looked back at him with wide eyes. What? You heard me clearly. His voice was calm and controlled, but there was something dangerous lurking underneath that made my pulse race. Delete every other match, every other conversation, every other potential arrangement you have on that app. From now on, if you want financial support, it comes exclusively from me. My mind was spinning out of control. Was he actually serious? Was Stephen Wells, the coldest, most untouchable man in the entire building, actually propositioning me? This had to be some kind of elaborate test or cruel joke. But sir, I don't understand. 4 minutes and 30 seconds, Callan. I looked down at my phone, my hands trembling so violently I could barely hold it steady. This was completely insane. This couldn't be real. But as I glanced back up at him, seeing that intense, unwavering stare, feeling the overwhelming weight of his presence filling the room, I realized something that both terrified and thrilled me in ways I couldn't begin to understand. Deep down, despite everything, despite the fear and shock and complete absurdity of the situation, I wanted to say yes. I deleted them all. Every single match, every conversation, every potential arrangement that had taken me weeks to carefully cultivate. My fingers moved mechanically across the screen while Stephen watched with those penetrating dark eyes, tracking every movement like a hawk studying its prey. When I finished and set the phone down on the conference table, my hands were still shaking uncontrollably. Good, he said, and there was a satisfaction in his voice that made my skin tingle with unexpected awareness. Now we can discuss terms like civilized adults. Terms? I stared at him, trying to process what was actually happening here. 20 minutes ago, I was just another struggling employee trying to make ends meet, desperately seeking financial stability through unconventional means. Now I was sitting across from my CEO, who had somehow transformed from the coldest, most intimidating man in the building into someone who was looking at me like I was something he wanted to possess entirely. I don't understand what's happening, I managed to say, finding my voice despite the chaos in my mind. What exactly do you want from me? He moved to the chair directly across from me, and suddenly the large conference table felt intimate, almost suffocating. His presence was completely overwhelming, making it nearly impossible to think straight or maintain any semblance of composure. I want exactly what you were offering them, he said with simple directness that somehow made it sound both businesslike and intensely personal. Companionship when I need it, discretion in all matters, your time and attention when required. But you're my boss, I protested weakly, grasping for any rational objection, which makes this arrangement significantly more convenient for both parties involved. He pulled out a tablet, fingers moving across the screen with practiced efficiency. I've already drafted a comprehensive contract covering all necessary details. A contract? Of course he had already prepared a fucking contract. I watched in fascination and growing disbelief as he turned the screen toward me, revealing a document that looked more thorough and detailed than most major business deals I'd seen in my 3 years at the company. $15,000 per month, he said, his tone remaining completely professional as if he were discussing quarterly earnings reports. Your mother's medical bills will be covered separately and in full. In exchange, you'll be available when I require your presence. Business dinners, social events, corporate functions, occasional business trips. My eyes widened in complete shock. $15,000? That was significantly more than my current salary, more money than I'd ever seen in my life. This is absolutely crazy. Is it really? He leaned back in his chair, studying my reaction with clinical interest. You clearly needed reliable financial support for legitimate reasons. I need someone trustworthy for social situations, someone who already understands how to be professional and discreet in corporate environments. I scrolled through the contract with growing amazement, my mind reeling at the comprehensive nature of it. It covered absolutely everything: detailed confidentiality clauses, explicit expectations for behavior and availability, even a clearly outlined termination clause with generous severance provisions. But as I read more carefully, I realized something significant was conspicuously missing. There's nothing here about. I felt heat rising to my cheeks again, unable to meet his eyes. Physical expectations or intimate requirements. Something shifted almost imperceptibly in his expression. A flicker of something I couldn't quite read or interpret. That would be entirely up to your personal discretion and comfort level, he said quietly, his voice taking on a slightly rougher quality. I'm not paying for sex, Callan. I'm paying for your company, your intelligence, your ability to handle yourself in complex social situations. The way he said my name sent an unexpected shiver down my spine. I'd heard him say it hundreds of times in meetings and casual encounters, but never like this. Never with that slight roughness, that hint of intimacy, like he was actually tasting my name on his tongue. What if people find out about this arrangement? They won't, he said with absolute certainty that brooked no argument. I've built my entire career on controlling information flow and managing public perception. This situation won't be any different. I stared down at the contract again, my mind racing through all the implications and possibilities. This could solve literally everything that had been keeping me awake at night. My mom's mounting medical bills that were drowning us both. My student loans that seemed to grow larger every month. The constant stress of living paycheck to paycheck while watching my savings disappear. But it would also mean binding myself to Stephen Wells in a way I had never imagined possible. I need some time to think about all of this, I said carefully. You have until tomorrow morning to make your decision. He stood up, buttoning his suit jacket with practiced efficiency that spoke of years of corporate discipline. Meeting at 9 sharp, my office. As he moved toward the door with that confident stride, I found myself calling after him almost involuntarily. Why me? Out of everyone in this building, everyone you could choose, why did you pick me? He paused with his hand on the door handle, and for just a moment I saw something unexpectedly vulnerable flash across his typically controlled features. Because you're the only person in this entire building who has never wanted anything from me, he said with quiet honesty. Until now, that is. The door closed behind him with a soft click that seemed to echo in the suddenly empty room, leaving me alone with the contract and my racing, chaotic thoughts. I read through it again, memorizing every clause, every condition, every carefully worded provision. It was generous beyond belief, almost too generous to be real. But what scared me most wasn't the money or the complex implications of what I'd be agreeing to. What terrified me most was that from the moment he'd said my name with that new intimacy, my heart had started racing in a way that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with unexpected, unwanted attraction. I gathered my things and returned to my desk, desperately trying to act normal while my coworkers continued their daily routines around me, completely oblivious to the life-changing conversation that had just occurred. But everything felt fundamentally different now. Every time I caught a glimpse of Stephen through his office windows, I remembered the way he'd looked at me in that conference room. Like I was something precious he'd been waiting for his entire life. I signed the contract at exactly 9:01 a.m., my hand trembling slightly as I wrote my name at the bottom of the page with deliberate care. Stephen watched from behind his massive mahogany desk, his dark eyes remaining unreadable as always. But I caught the subtle curve of satisfaction that crossed his lips when I finally set the expensive pen down. "Welcome to the arrangement, Callan," he said, and the way he pronounced arrangement made it sound like something far more intimate and significant than a simple business transaction. "So what happens now?" I asked, trying desperately to keep my voice steady and professional despite the chaos of emotions swirling inside me. He stood up gracefully, walking around the imposing desk until he was close enough that I could smell his cologne, something expensive and intoxicatingly dark that made my head spin slightly with its masculine sophistication. "Now we begin with dinner tonight. 8 o'clock sharp." He handed me an elegant card with an address embossed in gold lettering. "Dress appropriately. We're going somewhere that will make the right impression on the right people. I looked down at the card, immediately recognizing the name of the most exclusive and expensive restaurant in the city. The kind of establishment where reservations were booked months in advance and a single meal cost more than most people's monthly rent. I don't have anything remotely appropriate to wear to a place like this, I admitted, feeling foolish for not considering this obvious complication earlier. Already handled completely. He returned to his desk, retrieving another card with practiced efficiency. My personal shopper will meet you at Nordstrom during your lunch break. Everything you need will be charged directly to my personal account. The casual way he said it, like spending thousands of dollars on clothes for me, was absolutely nothing. Made my stomach flip with a mixture of excitement and overwhelming uncertainty. This was really happening. I was really going to become Stephen Wells's. What exactly was I becoming? One more important thing, he said, his voice dropping to that lower register that seemed to resonate through my entire body. Tonight isn't simply dinner between two people. This is a test of your capabilities. A test? Important business associates will be there. Influential people who need to believe completely that you're with me, because you genuinely want to be, not because there's a financial arrangement involved. His eyes met mine with piercing intensity, and I saw something genuinely dangerous lurking in their depths. Can you handle that level of performance? The challenge in his voice awakened something inside me that I didn't even know existed. A determination and confidence that surprised me with its sudden strength. Yes, I said, genuinely surprising myself with how confident and assured I sounded. Excellent. He smiled then, a real genuine smile that completely transformed his entire face from cold and intimidating to devastatingly attractive. I'll pick you up at 7:30 precisely. The rest of the day passed in a surreal blur of activity and preparation. The personal shopper, an elegant woman named Claire, who treated me like I was already someone genuinely important, had me try on suits that cost more than I typically made in an entire month. She ultimately chose a perfectly tailored charcoal gray suit that fit my body like it had been specifically designed for me, along with Italian leather shoes, carefully selected accessories, and even a bottle of sophisticated cologne. Mr. Wells has absolutely excellent taste in everything, she said while making final adjustments to the jacket, and he was extremely specific about exactly what he wanted for you tonight. By 7:30 I was standing in front of my bathroom mirror, barely recognizing the person staring back at me. The expensive suit made me look older, more sophisticated and worldly, like the kind of person who actually belonged next to someone like Stephen Wells at exclusive restaurants. My phone buzzed with a text message. I'm downstairs waiting. I grabbed my keys and headed down to the lobby, my heart pounding harder with each step. But absolutely nothing could have prepared me for seeing Stephen Wells outside of our sterile office environment. He was leaning casually against a gleaming black Mercedes, wearing a perfectly fitted navy suit that made him look impossibly handsome and sophisticated. When he saw me emerge from the building, he straightened up, and I caught something unexpected flash across his typically controlled expression. You clean up remarkably well, he said, his voice noticeably rougher than usual. All thanks to your shopper's expertise, I replied, suddenly feeling incredibly self-conscious under his intense scrutiny. He opened the passenger door for me with old-fashioned courtesy, and as I slid into the luxurious leather seat, his hand briefly touched my shoulder. The contact was light and professional, but it sent electricity coursing through my entire body in ways I absolutely wasn't prepared for. The restaurant exceeded every expectation I'd had. Crystal chandeliers cast elegant light over pristine white tablecloths, and servers moved between tables like perfectly choreographed dancers. But what I hadn't expected was how surprisingly natural it felt sitting across from Stephen in this sophisticated environment, watching him order wine with the confidence of someone who had done this countless times before. Nervous about tonight? He asked after the sommelier had departed with our wine selections. Absolutely terrified, I admitted with complete honesty. Good. A healthy amount of fear keeps you sharp and focused. He leaned forward slightly, creating a sense of intimacy despite our public setting. The couple at the corner table, that's Robert and Linda Chen. He owns approximately half of the commercial real estate in this city, and they're definitely watching our interaction carefully. I resisted the overwhelming urge to look in their direction. What should I do? Simply be yourself. But specifically the version of yourself that chose to be here with me tonight. Before I could ask what exactly that meant, he reached across the elegant table and took my hand in his. The touch was warm, firm, and completely unexpected. My breath caught audibly, and I saw him notice my involuntary reaction with obvious satisfaction. "Relax completely," he murmured, his thumb tracing gentle patterns across my knuckles. "We need to appear romantically involved." The word involved sent unexpected heat rushing through my entire body. I tried desperately to focus on the business aspects, the performance we were putting on for observers, but all I could think about was how perfectly right his hand felt holding mine. "Tell me about yourself," he said, his voice becoming noticeably softer and more intimate. "The real Callan, not just the employee I see in meetings. What do you want to know?" "Everything that matters." His eyes were intensely focused, giving me his complete and undivided attention. "What you dream about when you're alone. What genuinely scares you. What makes you truly happy." For the next hour, while we shared dinner that probably cost more than my monthly rent, I found myself opening up to him in ways I had never expected possible. He listened intently to everything. My constant worries about my mother's deteriorating health, my dreams of maybe returning to school someday, even my deep embarrassment about resorting to the sugar daddy app. I'd never done anything like that before, I admitted quietly. The app, I mean. I was just completely desperate for any solution. "I know exactly why you did it," he said with surprising gentleness. "I conducted thorough research before making this arrangement. Research on me, complete background check, detailed financial records, comprehensive social media analysis." He stated it matter-of-factly as if investigating employees was perfectly normal. "I needed to know exactly who you really were." "And what did you discover?" He was quiet for a long moment, his fingers still holding mine with surprising tenderness. "Someone who's been carrying the entire world on his shoulders for far too long." The sincere emotion in his voice caught me completely off guard. This wasn't the cold, intimidating CEO from our office. This was someone entirely different. Someone unexpectedly human and caring. "Mr. Wells." A voice interrupted our intimate conversation. I looked up to see Robert Chen approaching our table with his wife following closely behind. "Robert," Stephen said, standing smoothly to shake hands while never releasing my hand. "I'd like you to meet Callan." As I shook hands with the Chans, trying to appear natural while Stephen's thumb continued tracing intimate patterns on my palm, I realized something that genuinely scared me. This didn't feel like acting anymore. 3 weeks into our carefully constructed arrangement, I thought I had finally figured out all the unspoken rules that governed our complicated relationship. Dinner twice a week at impossibly expensive restaurants, where Stephen needed to be seen with the right kind of companion. Business events where I played the role of his sophisticated partner, making small talk with investors and clients, while he conducted his corporate warfare. The occasional weekend brunch at exclusive country clubs where appearances mattered more than actual conversation. I was getting remarkably good at playing whatever role he needed me to fill, adapting to each situation with growing confidence. But apparently, I hadn't figured out anything at all about Stephen Wells or what he actually wanted from me. "Cancel whatever plans you have tomorrow night," Stephen said without any preamble, appearing at my desk like a dark-suited apparition. It was Friday afternoon, and I had been looking forward to a quiet weekend of Netflix and trying to catch up on sleep after another week of high-stakes corporate theater. "I don't have any plans," I replied honestly, looking up at him with curiosity. He was standing closer to my desk than strictly professional, and I caught a hint of unusual tension in his typically controlled demeanor that immediately put me on edge. "Perfect. We're attending Marcus Webb's gallery opening tomorrow evening." The way Stephen said the name, with just the slightest edge of something dark and dangerous, made me instantly alert and curious about what I was walking into. Marcus Webb. I'd heard that name mentioned in various business contexts. Some young tech entrepreneur who had made an absolute fortune in cryptocurrency and now spent his time collecting expensive art and making strategic investments. But the way Stephen's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly when he mentioned Webb suggested there was significant history between them, possibly the kind of professional rivalry that could turn personal and ugly. "Is this another business networking opportunity?" I asked carefully, trying to gauge his mood and the underlying currents I was clearly missing. "Something along those lines," he said, his voice remaining carefully controlled but with an underlying tension that made my pulse quicken with anticipation. "Marcus has been particularly persistent in his attempts to establish business relationships with our company. This gallery opening presents an excellent opportunity to make my position crystal clear regarding his various proposals." That evening, as I got ready in another expensive suit that Stephen had purchased for me, this one a deep midnight blue that made my eyes look darker and more intense, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was much more to tomorrow's gallery opening than Stephen was telling me. The way he had looked when mentioning Marcus Webb suggested personal animosity that went far beyond simple business disagreements or competitive rivalry. When Stephen picked me up the next evening, he was quieter than usual during our drive across the city, his hands gripping the steering wheel with more tension than I had ever seen from him. His usually perfect composure seemed slightly strained, like he was preparing for some kind of battle that I wasn't fully aware of yet. "Are you all right?" I asked as we pulled up to the sleek modern gallery, noting the tension in his shoulders and the tight set of his jaw. He looked at me then, and I saw something unreadable and intense in his dark eyes that made my breath catch slightly in my throat. "Just remember everything we've discussed about maintaining appropriate appearances in public. Tonight is more important than you might realize." The gallery was packed with the city's cultural and financial elite. Champagne flowing freely as beautifully dressed people wandered between abstract paintings that probably cost more than most people's houses. The art was bold and contemporary, splashes of color and geometric shapes that spoke to modern sensibilities and expensive tastes. But my attention was immediately drawn to the man approaching us with confident strides, tall, blonde, with the kind of effortless charm and magnetic personality that naturally drew people into his orbit. Marcus Webb in person was even more impressive than his photographs suggested. "Stephen Wells," Marcus said with a dazzling smile, extending his hand in greeting, though something about his expression didn't quite reach his calculating blue eyes. "I wasn't entirely certain you would actually show up tonight given how busy you always claim to be." "Marcus." Stephen's handshake was brief and professionally polite, but I could feel the tension radiating from his body like heat. "Congratulations on what appears to be a very successful opening." Marcus's gaze shifted to me with obvious interest, and I saw something predatory light up in his expression as he took in my appearance with obvious appreciation. "And who might this exceptionally attractive gentleman be?" "Colin Rivers," Stephen said, his hand moving possessively to the small of my back in a gesture that felt territorial and protective. "My partner in both business and personal matters." Partner. Not date, not companion, not associate. Partner. The words sent an unexpected thrill through my entire body that I tried desperately to ignore while maintaining my composure. "Colin." Marcus repeated my name slowly as if tasting it, stepping closer and extending his hand with a smile that was entirely too charming. "Marcus Webb, and I must say that Stephen has absolutely impeccable taste in all things." The compliment made heat rise to my cheeks, and I saw Stephen's jaw tighten visibly beside me as he watched our interaction with growing displeasure. But what I didn't expect was for Marcus to hold on to my hand significantly longer than was socially appropriate, his thumb brushing across my knuckles in a gesture that was unmistakably intimate and deliberately provocative. "Thank you," I managed to say, trying to extract my hand from his lingering grip without being overtly rude in such a public setting. "You know, Colin," Marcus continued, finally releasing my hand but not stepping back to provide appropriate personal space, "if you ever find yourself growing tired of the corporate world and all its restrictive limitations, I'm always actively seeking intelligent, attractive individuals to join my various business ventures. The compensation and creative freedom would be quite substantial." The job offer was clearly directed at me, but his eyes flicked meaningfully to Stephen as he spoke, as if he was testing boundaries and seeing how far he could push before getting a reaction. "That's very generous of you to offer," I replied diplomatically, "but I'm extremely happy exactly where I am right now." "Are you really?" Marcus smiled with obvious amusement, leaning even closer to me in a way that felt deliberately intimate and inappropriate. "Stephen can be rather demanding and controlling, both as a boss and as a romantic partner. From what I understand, surely someone with your obvious intelligence and appeal deserves more freedom and appreciation." Before I could formulate any kind of response to his increasingly bold suggestions, Stephen's arm wrapped firmly around my waist, pulling me securely against his side in a gesture that was unmistakably possessive and protective. "Marcus," Stephen said, his voice dropping to that dangerously quiet tone that made everyone in our office building nervous. "I believe someone across the room is trying to get your attention regarding the evening's proceedings." Marcus glanced back toward a group of well-dressed patrons who were indeed gesturing in his direction, then looked back at us with that same knowing, calculating smile that suggested he was enjoying this territorial display immensely. "Of course, duty calls at my own event. But Callan, please do consider my offer very seriously. Here's my personal card with my private number." He handed me an expensive business card, his fingers brushing mine again deliberately, and I saw something genuinely dark and dangerous flash in Stephen's eyes as he watched this obvious flirtation. "I'll definitely think about it," I said politely, accepting the card to avoid creating a public scene, though I had absolutely no intention of ever using it. "I sincerely hope you will give it proper consideration," Marcus said, his gaze lingering on me with obvious interest for another long moment. "Enjoy the rest of your evening, gentlemen." As soon as Marcus walked away to greet his other guests, I felt Stephen's grip on my waist tighten possessively, his fingers pressing into my side with barely controlled intensity. "What exactly was that about?" I asked quietly, genuinely confused by the obvious undercurrents of tension and rivalry I had just witnessed. "Marcus Webb has always enjoyed taking things that don't belong to him," Stephen replied, his voice carefully controlled but with an underlying current of anger that made my pulse race with unexpected excitements. "Business opportunities, social connections, personal relationships, anything he thinks might give him leverage or simply amuse him." "What kind of things?" I pressed, genuinely curious about their obvious history. "People, opportunities, anything he believes might get under my skin or provide him with some kind of advantage." Stephen's hand moved from my waist to intertwine our fingers possessively. "He's testing boundaries tonight, seeing how far he can push before I react." "And what boundaries would those be exactly?" Stephen looked at me then with an intensity that made my breath catch, something raw and possessive burning in his dark eyes that sent heat rushing through my entire body. "The ones that prevent me from making it very clear to everyone in this room that you belong exclusively to me." The possessiveness in his voice was unlike anything I had ever experienced, sending shivers of excitement and anticipation down my spine. This wasn't part of our carefully negotiated arrangement, wasn't part of the professional act we had been maintaining. This felt dangerous, real, like we were crossing lines that we had carefully drawn between business and something much more personal and intimate. "Stephen," I started to say, but he was already moving, guiding me smoothly toward a quieter corner of the gallery where we would have more privacy. "He's still watching us," Stephen murmured against my ear, his breath warm against my skin as he backed me against the wall. "He thinks he can play games with me, test my resolve and my commitment. So what do we do about it?" Instead of answering with words, Stephen stepped closer, his body pressing against mine in a way that made my heart race with anticipation. His hand came up to cup my face, thumb tracing my cheekbone with surprising gentleness that contrasted sharply with the intensity burning in his eyes. "We make it absolutely clear that there are no games here worth playing," he said, his voice low and rough with emotion. I had never heard from him before. And then he kissed me with a passion and possessiveness that took my breath away completely. The kiss at Marcus Webb's gallery changed absolutely everything between Stephen and me, creating an electric tension that hadn't existed before in our carefully constructed professional arrangement. Over the following 2 weeks, there was an awareness crackling between us that made every casual touch feel charged with electricity. Every shared glance loaded with unspoken possibilities. Stephen became noticeably more possessive during our public appearances together, his hand always finding mine with increasing frequency. His attention focused on me in ways that felt less like calculated performance and more like genuine claiming behavior that left me breathless and confused. But despite this obvious shift in the dynamics between us, he never once mentioned the kiss or acknowledged that anything fundamental had changed in our relationship. During regular business hours, he remained my cold, intimidatingly professional CEO, maintaining perfect distance and corporate propriety. It was only during our arrangement events that I caught glimpses of the man who had pressed me against that gallery wall with such passionate intensity, who had kissed me like I was something precious he was afraid of losing. The contradiction was slowly driving me completely insane with want and confusion. "You seem unusually distracted tonight," Stephen observed during dinner at yet another exclusive restaurant where we needed to be seen together. "Is everything satisfactory with our current arrangement?" I looked across the elegantly set table at him, this impossibly handsome, powerful man, who was paying me a substantial monthly sum to sit here, smile appropriately, and pretend we were something we clearly weren't. Except lately, the pretending had become increasingly difficult because it felt less like acting and more like suppressing feelings that were growing stronger every day. "Everything is perfectly fine," I lied smoothly, taking a sip of wine that probably cost more than most people spent on groceries in a month. "Marcus Webb called me this afternoon," Stephen said casually, cutting into his perfectly prepared steak with precise movements that spoke of years of practiced elegance and control. My heart immediately skipped a beat at the unexpected mention. "He did what?" "Apparently, he remains quite interested in poaching you from both the company and our personal arrangements." Stephen's eyes met mine across the table with that penetrating intensity that always made me feel like he could see directly into my soul. "He made an extremely generous offer that most rational people would find very difficult to refuse." "I'm not interested in anything Marcus Webb has to offer," I said immediately, perhaps more forcefully than the situation strictly required. "Aren't you?" Stephen leaned forward slightly, his voice dropping to that lower register that never failed to send shivers down my spine. "Triple your current salary, comprehensive benefits package, and the opportunity to work on innovative projects that would advance your career significantly and provide valuable experience. Most ambitious young professionals would consider that the opportunity of a lifetime." Something about his tone made me increasingly suspicious of his motives in bringing this up. "Are you actively trying to encourage me to leave our arrangement?" "I'm trying to understand your motivations for staying when you clearly have other, potentially better options available to you." The question hung between us in the sophisticated atmosphere of the restaurant, weighted with implications I wasn't entirely sure I was ready to examine too closely. Why was I staying? The arrangement had certainly solved my immediate financial crisis, eliminated the constant stress of mounting bills and impossible choices. But there were other ways to make money, other opportunities for advancement that didn't require binding myself to Stephen Wells in such a complicated and emotionally confusing capacity. So why did the mere thought of leaving, of not seeing Stephen every day, make my chest tighten with something that felt dangerously close to panic? "Our current arrangement works well for both of our needs," I said carefully, trying to maintain some semblance of professional distance despite the personal nature of our conversation. "Does it really work for you?" Stephen's hand moved across the white tablecloth, his fingers brushing mine with deliberate intent. "Because you seem increasingly uncomfortable lately, especially when I touch you during our public appearances. Your body language has changed significantly over the past few weeks." Heat rushed to my face as I realized he had been carefully observing and cataloging my reactions with that same analytical precision he brought to every aspect of his business dealings. Of course he had noticed my growing inability to maintain emotional distance when he held my hand or put his arm around me. The man missed absolutely nothing. "I don't know what you think you're observing," I said weakly, knowing it was a transparent lie. "Don't you?" His fingers traced across my knuckles with maddeningly gentle pressure. "Every time I hold your hand now, you tense up like you're fighting some kind of internal battle. When I put my arm around you at social events, your breathing becomes noticeably irregular. You're either developing feelings you don't know how to handle, or you've become an incredibly talented actor since we began this arrangement." The directness of his observation left me speechless and exposed. Sitting there under the warm lighting of the restaurant while he systematically dismantled my carefully constructed emotional defenses with surgical precision. "Which is it, Callan?" Before I could formulate any kind of coherent response, my phone buzzed insistently with an incoming text message. Without thinking, I glanced down at the screen instinctively. "Marcus Webb, dinner tomorrow evening? I would very much enjoy discussing my proposition in a more private, intimate setting." Stephen's expression darkened considerably as he saw the message displayed on my phone screen. something dangerous and possessive flashing in his eyes that made my pulse race with unexpected excitement. "He certainly is persistent in his pursuit," Stephen said, his voice taking on that dangerously quiet quality that I had learned to associate with barely controlled anger. "I'm not interested in him or anything he's offering," I said quickly, desperate to dispel whatever conclusions Stephen might be drawing from Marcus's continued attempts at contact. "No?" Stephen's voice was deadly quiet now, the kind of tone that made corporate executives break out in cold sweats during board meetings. "Then why haven't you blocked his number and ended his persistent attempts at communication?" I opened my mouth to respond, but realized with growing horror that I didn't actually have a good answer to his perfectly reasonable question. Why hadn't I blocked Marcus Webb's number after that uncomfortable encounter at the gallery? Maybe because some pathetic part of me enjoyed the attention and validation of being actively pursued by someone so successful and attractive. Maybe because having options made me feel less vulnerable in this increasingly complicated situation with Stephen. Maybe because the power dynamic of being wanted gave me some small measure of control in a relationship where I often felt completely powerless. "I want an answer, Callan," Stephen demanded, his tone becoming sharper and more authoritative. "I honestly don't know why I haven't blocked him," I admitted, feeling foolish and defensive about my own inexplicable behavior. Something shifted dramatically in Stephen's expression, disappointment mixed with what looked like genuine hurt, emotions I had never seen him display in all our time together. "I see." He signaled efficiently for the check, his movements sharp and controlled. "I think perhaps it's time we concluded this evening and returned to our respective homes." The drive back to my apartment was suffocatingly silent, tension filling the expensive car like thick smoke that made it difficult to breathe normally. When we arrived at my building, I expected Stephen to remain in the driver's seat as he usually did, maintaining that professional boundary between his world and mine. Instead, he got out of the car and followed me toward the entrance with determined strides that made my heart race with anticipation and apprehension. "Stephen, what are you doing?" I asked, fumbling with my keys as nervous energy made my hands unsteady. "We need to have a serious conversation about the future of this arrangement," he said, his voice controlled but carrying an underlying intensity that made every nerve in my body stand at attention. "And we're going to have that conversation privately, without the possibility of interruption or public observation." My hands were trembling noticeably as I finally managed to unlock my apartment door, acutely aware that we had never been alone together in my personal space before. This felt like crossing a significant line, entering territory that was dangerous and unpredictable in ways our carefully structured public appearances had never been. The moment the door closed behind us, Stephen turned on me with an intensity that took my breath away completely. 3 months, he said, his voice low and rough with barely controlled emotion. 3 months of this carefully orchestrated arrangement, and you still have absolutely no idea what you actually want from this situation or from me. "I know exactly what I want," I shot back, finally finding my voice and some measure of defensive anger to match his intensity. "Do you really?" Stephen stepped closer, backing me toward my living room with predatory grace. "Because from my perspective, it appears that you're keeping all your options carefully open, playing it safe while you decide what might be most advantageous for your future. Is that what you're doing with Marcus Webb? Maintaining his interest as a potential backup plan in case our arrangement doesn't work out to your satisfaction?" "No, that's not what this is about at all." "Then what is it about?" His hands gripped my shoulders with barely restrained intensity, his eyes blazing with emotions I had never seen from him before. "Because I'm exhausted from pretending this is simply a business transaction. I'm tired of acting like I don't notice the way you look at me when you think I'm not paying attention. I'm done pretending that I don't want to touch you every single second we're together." My breath caught in my throat as the words hung between us, raw and desperate and completely unexpected. "I'm in love with you," Stephen said, the confession exploding from him like something he could no longer contain. "I've been completely, hopelessly in love with you since that first day in the conference room when you looked at me like I was someone dangerous, someone who could destroy everything you cared about. And I cannot continue paying you to pretend to care about me when all I want is for these feelings to be real and reciprocated." The honesty of his confession hit me like a physical blow, stealing all the air from my lungs as I stared at him in shock. All this time, I had been so focused on my own growing feelings, my own confusion and desire, that I had never considered that Stephen might be experiencing the same overwhelming emotions that were tearing me apart from the inside. "You think I'm pretending?" I whispered, my voice barely audible in the charged atmosphere of my small apartment. "Aren't you?" Instead of attempting to answer with words that would inevitably fall short of expressing the complexity of what I was feeling, I reached up and pulled his mouth down to mine with desperate intensity. This kiss was completely different from the calculated display at the gallery. This was raw, hungry, desperate, filled with weeks of suppressed longing and unspoken emotions that we had both been too afraid to acknowledge. Stephen's hands tangled in my hair as he kissed me back with matching desperation, and I could taste the wine we had shared at dinner, could feel his heart racing against my chest as we finally stopped pretending that this was anything other than what it really was. When we finally broke apart, both of us breathing hard and shaking with the intensity of what had just passed between us, I looked into his eyes and saw my own feelings reflected back at me with startling clarity. "I quit," I whispered against his lips, my hands gripping his jacket to keep him close. "What are you saying?" "The arrangement. I'm ending our contract." My hands moved to cup his face, holding his intense gaze with my own. "I don't want your money anymore, Stephen. I want you. Just you." Something broke open in his expression then. Relief and joy and desire all mixing together in a way that transformed his entire face from the controlled mask he usually wore to something vulnerable and completely human. "Callan." He breathed my name like a prayer, and then he was kissing me again, backing me toward my bedroom as we both finally admitted what we had been too frightened to acknowledge for far too long. We were falling in love, and no contract in the world could contain or control what was happening between us. 6 months later, I woke up in Stephen's penthouse apartment to sunlight streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a breathtaking view of the entire city spread out below us like a glittering tapestry. His arm was wrapped securely around my waist, holding me against the warmth of his body, and even after all this time living together, it still felt surreal and wonderful to be here, not because of any financial arrangement or business contract, but simply because he wanted me to be part of his life in every possible way. "Good morning, beautiful," he murmured against the sensitive skin of my neck, his voice still rough and husky with sleep in a way that never failed to send pleasant shivers through my entire body. "Good morning to you too," I replied softly, turning carefully in his arms so I could face him properly. Even first thing in the morning, disheveled and completely unguarded, Stephen Wells was absolutely breathtaking to look at. The expensive suits and perfect grooming were impressive. But this version of him, relaxed and vulnerable and entirely mine, was infinitely more attractive to me. "Any regrets about this new life we've built together?" he asked. The same question he had been asking me every single morning since I had moved in with him 2 weeks ago. I knew the question came from a place of genuine insecurity. Despite his confident exterior, he needed constant reassurance that I was here because I wanted to be, not because I felt obligated or trapped by circumstances. "Just one small regret," I said, watching his expression tighten with worry and concern before I continued with a smile. "I regret that it took us so long to figure out what we really wanted from each other." Relief flooded his handsome features immediately, and he pulled me even closer, pressing a tender kiss to my forehead with the kind of gentle affection that still made my heart race after all this time. "I have something special for you," he said, reaching toward his nightstand with obvious nervousness that was completely unlike his usual confident demeanor. "Stephen, you know you don't need to buy me things anymore, right? I'm here because I love you, not because of any material benefits or financial incentives." "I know that completely," he assured me, pulling out a small velvet box that made my breath catch with anticipation. "But this isn't about our old arrangement or any kind of transaction. This is about our future together." Inside the elegant box was a key, sleek, modern, and clearly expensive, crafted from what looked like platinum with intricate engravings along its surface. "It's a key to the penthouse," he explained, his voice carrying an unusual note of vulnerability that I rarely heard from him. "I know you already have access to everything here, but this key is different. This key means that you live here because you choose to, because you want to build a life with me, not because I asked you to or because there's any kind of arrangement between us." I looked up at this incredible man who had somehow transformed from my intimidating, untouchable CEO into the person who made me coffee every morning. who held me tenderly when I had nightmares about my mother's health, who had somehow become the absolute center of my entire universe in ways I had never thought possible. Are you asking me to move in with you permanently? To make this official and real? I'm asking you to build something lasting with me, he said quietly, his dark eyes intense with emotion. No contracts, no business arrangements, no financial obligations of any kind. Just us, choosing each other every single day because we want to be together. Before I could respond with the enthusiastic yes that was already forming on my lips, his phone began ringing insistently on the nightstand. He glanced at the caller ID and frowned with obvious displeasure. Marcus Webb, he said, showing me the screen with barely concealed irritation. That man has absolutely no sense of appropriate timing or boundaries. We looked at each other and I saw the question in Stephen's eyes. Marcus had been calling sporadically ever since that uncomfortable encounter at the gallery opening. Still trying to poach me for his various business ventures. Still playing whatever psychological games he thought would give him some kind of advantage over Stephen. Answer it, I said decisively. Let's end this once and for all. Stephen raised an eyebrow at my suggestion, but accepted the call anyway, putting it on speaker so we could both participate in the conversation. Stephen, Marcus's smooth, confident voice filled our intimate bedroom space. I hope I'm not calling at an inconvenient time. What do you want, Marcus? Stephen's voice was professionally polite but clearly strained with barely controlled impatience. Actually, I was hoping to speak directly with Callan if he's available. I have some exciting new opportunities that might interest someone with his particular talents and appeal. I looked at Stephen, who nodded his encouragement, then spoke clearly toward the phone. I'm here, Marcus. Callan, how wonderful to hear your voice. Even through the phone, Marcus's charm was palpable and manipulative. I was wondering if you had given any additional consideration to my previous offers. I know it's been quite some time, but several new positions have opened up that would be absolutely perfect for someone with your intelligence and attractiveness. In fact, I would be willing to make the compensation package even more generous than what we discussed previously. That's very kind of you to think of me, I replied diplomatically, but I'm not interested in pursuing any opportunities outside of my current situation. Are you absolutely certain about that? Marcus's tone became slightly more pressing and manipulative. Because I've been hearing some rather interesting rumors about your arrangement with Steve. If that situation doesn't work out the way you're hoping, you might find yourself in need of new opportunities and fresh starts. The implied threat was subtle but unmistakable, and I felt Stephen tense beside me with barely controlled anger at Marcus's obvious attempt at manipulation and intimidation. Marcus, I said, my voice steady and confident, I need to clarify something important for you. There is no arrangement between Stephen and me anymore. Oh, really? Marcus sounded genuinely surprised, and perhaps a bit too pleased. Did Stephen finally decide to end your employment with his company? No, nothing like that at all. I took Stephen's hand in mine, intertwining our fingers as I prepared to make our relationship status absolutely clear. I'm with Stephen because I'm completely in love with him, and if you call either of us again with these inappropriate propositions, I will personally make sure that everyone in this city's business community knows exactly what kind of man you really are and how you conduct yourself. There was stunned silence on the other end of the line, followed by what sounded like bitter, humorless laughter. I see. Well, congratulations, I suppose, though I have to wonder how long this romantic fantasy will last once the novelty wears off and reality sets in. Goodbye, Marcus, Stephen said firmly, ending the call with obvious satisfaction before turning to me with an expression of pure admiration and love. I love you, he said suddenly, his voice filled with genuine emotion. I love you too, more than I ever thought possible. No, let me be more specific about what I mean. He turned to face me fully in our rumpled bed, his hands framing my face gently. I love that you just handled that situation perfectly without needing me to fight your battles for you. I love that you didn't need me to protect you because you're perfectly capable of protecting yourself. I love that you chose me freely when you could have chosen anyone else, including someone who might have been easier or less complicated. I kissed him then, soft and deep and full of all the love and commitment I felt for this incredible man who had changed my entire life in the most unexpected and wonderful ways. So, I said when we finally broke apart, both of us breathing slightly harder. About that key you offered me. Yes? I accept your offer completely, but only if you accept my condition in return. He looked curious and slightly amused. What condition would that be? No more contracts or legal documents between us. Ever. Whatever this relationship becomes, however it evolves and grows, we do it without paperwork or formal agreements of any kind. Just two people choosing to love each other. He smiled then. That genuine, transformative smile that was reserved entirely for me and made my heart skip every single time I saw it. Deal, he said, sealing our agreement with a kiss that tasted like promises and new beginnings and the kind of forever that couldn't be captured in any contract. Later that morning, as we cooked breakfast together in his ridiculously luxurious kitchen, I found myself reflecting on how dramatically everything had changed since that terrifying day when he had caught me on the Sugar Daddy app. I had been desperately searching for financial security, for someone who could solve my problems and take care of my responsibilities. Instead, I had found someone who wanted to share those problems and responsibilities. Someone who loved me enough to want to face whatever challenges life might bring us together as equal partners. What are you thinking about so seriously? Stephen asked, wrapping his arms around me from behind as I flipped pancakes at the expensive stove. Just this. Us. How we managed to find each other despite all the complicated circumstances. Any regrets about how our story began? I leaned back against his chest, feeling his steady heartbeat against my shoulder blade, surrounded by the warmth and security of his love. Not a single one. Not anymore. And for the first time in my entire adult life, I meant those words with complete and total honesty. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city stretched endlessly before us, full of infinite possibilities and new adventures waiting to be discovered. Somewhere out there, Marcus Webb was probably plotting his next move, and countless other people were downloading dating apps and making questionable choices in their search for connection and financial stability. But here, in this beautiful kitchen, with this amazing man who had somehow become my entire world, I had found something real and lasting and beautiful. Something that no contract could ever define or contain. Something that felt exactly like coming home.